This short summary is going to be an addition onto the 74 Super Outbreak short summary that I have already done. By no means are you required to actually watch that short summary to watch this one. This one is simply going to be looking at the F5s from the Super Outbreak of 74 in closer detail, or in better detail, I should say. We start with our meteorological conditions. All of the F5s from the 74 Super would take place on April 3rd, so we'll take a look at that day. Our low pressure on April 3rd had started 2 days previously, and this low pressure created a small outbreak on the 1st and 2nd that I have already done a video on. This low pressure would also deepen to what I found a minimum of 980 millibars, and Cape in the region where all of our tornadoes happened would be 2,500 joules per kilogram. This is 1,000 joules per kilogram more than what is considered adequate for tornado genesis. Again, April 3rd, 1974 is the only day to have F5s in the 74 Super outbreak. This is also when most of the 148 one in Canada tornadoes would happen. A few would happen on April 4th, but still. We start with our first and probably least known about tornado, or at least one not commonly discussed or just not known about, at least. This tornado would start east of New Boston and went to Underwood, Indiana. This is a first of 7 F5s. This tornado would travel a very impressive 105 kilometers, and at maximum was 1.61 kilometers wide. That is a mile wide. Also interesting to note is our photo here. We do not have a condensation funnel. Instead, we just have what appears to just be a really messy looking wall cloud, but don't be mistaken, that is indeed a tornado. Not all tornadoes have condensation funnels. This tornado would injure 86 people and cause the deaths of 6. This tornado is the first of 5 violent siblings. That means that just one supercell was dropping a tornado. The tornado lifts, the cell recycles, drops another tornado, repeats until the supercell does not have the conditions required to produce any more tornadoes. Generally, cells do not produce this many tornadoes. There are, of course, exceptions to this. And 4 other siblings is a lot. 5 in total is a lot for just one supercell. But for all of them to be violent is something completely different. That means that this cell had very ripe conditions every single time that it dropped a tornado. Violent tornadoes, of course, meaning F4 and above. This tornado would wipe all but 10 homes in the town of Martinsburg, Indiana, away. Martinsburg was essentially wiped off the map, as is the case with most of Daisy Hill as well. This tornado is also notable for dropping a car into a basement. It sounds weird to say, but I hope that the house was gone before that car was dropped into that basement. This tornado would also travel across mostly farmland, thank goodness, and not directly hit very many towns. Our second tornado is the Brandenburg F5. This tornado started southwest of Hardinsburg, Kentucky, and went all the way into north of Laconia, Indiana. This tornado is the only tornado so far, as of the time that I'm recording this, to produce F5, or in modern times now, EF5 damage in Kentucky. There have definitely almost been more EF5 or F5 tornadoes. For example, oh my goodness, um, the tornado that happened just south of Paducah. I am completely forgetting the name of the town that got hit, but that was, I believe it was a 190 EF4, almost a 200 EF4. In any case, back to this tornado. This tornado had a path length of 51.7 kilometers long, would injure 257 and caused the deaths of 31 people. This tornado would only become violent after Hardinsburg, so it was likely anywhere from, since I did not get a specific Fujita number, I think it was obviously not F4 or F5 as it hit Hardinsburg. My guess would be F3. This tornado would cross the Ohio River. Many tornadoes cross rivers, but this is the only tornado that I know of that actually caused a fall in the water level of the river in the local area, and then a subsequent rise, presumably above the banks, and then from there I can assume a flood after that. Obviously, again, tornadoes cross rivers, but this is the only one that I know that has actually done this type of deal before. Brandenburg, Kentucky would be extremely hardly hit. Other towns would be as well, of course. As you can see in our bottom right, we have many buildings completely wiped away, and those that weren't were very heavily damaged. We can definitely see, unfortunately this isn't in color, but I can definitely presume some ground scouring. But in Brandenburg, Kentucky, specifically Brandenburg's Green Street, would suffer 18 deaths. That is half, just over half of the deaths from this tornado. To go off of this, and off the photo of Brandenburg, many well-anchored or well-bolted homes would be completely swept away. This tornado is one of three, in my mind, in contention that are the strongest from this outbreak, if not the strongest. Again, there are two more that could have also possibly been the strongest. Lastly, a tree was apparently impaled with, I presume, a plastic curtain rod. Now, unfortunately, I could not find a picture of that tree, as that would be pretty interesting to see. And again, the ground scouring was also very intense. You also see from the photo of this tornado, we do have what appears to be a small vorticity noodle over here on its right hand side in this photo. Our next tornado is definitely the most famous of all of the tornadoes to ever happen from this 74 super outbreak, the Xenia F5. This tornado started southwest of Xenia, Ohio, and went to east of Springfield, Ohio. This tornado is the deadliest of the outbreak, the deadliest since 1952's Udall, Kansas tornado. This tornado would trek 50.4 kilometers, and at its widest was 1.2 kilometers wide. Also notably is that this tornado was presumably highly multi-vortex. As you can see, there's no very well-structured shape to this tornado in either of the photos that I have. This tornado would injure 1,150 people and killed 36. This is definitely in contention for being the strongest of the outbreak of the 74 Super. There was extensive wind rowing that was caused by this tornado. Now, due to how small I had to make this picture in the lower left, it is a little hard to see, but trust me, it is there. Entire blocks, communities, rows of brick homes were completely wiped away. That is not something an EF3 does. That can be something that an F4 does. That is absolutely something that an F5 does. This tornado was reportedly traveling at around 50 miles per hour. That is a forward speed. Now, most tornadoes don't necessarily move that fast. Usually you're looking at more 25 to 40-ish, with 40-ish being much more faster than normal. Usually around 15-ish to 25-ish, 30 is, I believe, your average. So this is a very fast-moving tornado. Dr. Ted Fujita almost gave this tornado a preliminary rating of F6 plus or minus 1. Now, given how there is no official F6 tornado, this is an F5, clearly this tornado is not given this F6 rating. When Dr. Ted Fujita was also surveying the damage from Xenia, he said that it was some of the worst he had ever seen. He would later go on to say the same thing about Gerald, Texas in 1997. Our next tornado occurred north of Rising Sun, Indiana, and went to west of White Oak, Ohio. This tornado is a very well photographed tri-state tornado. This is the Sadler Park-Cincinnati F5. This tornado had a pretty impressive path of 33.5 kilometers. Along its way, it would injure 210 people and kill 3. A floating restaurant was lifted, completely ripped from its moorings, and then flipped by this tornado. This floating restaurant was eventually recovered several miles downstream. A home nearby this floating restaurant was lifted completely off of its foundation and thrown into the river. That is something that is definitely not normally done. I have no idea also if this home, as it was in the process of being lifted, was also destroyed as well. According to NWS surveyors, a truck was tossed over 5 homes before being slammed into the ground. Numerous foundations were left completely bare. Just in Hamilton County, Ohio alone, there would be 190 injuries. Oops, sorry there. This tornado, as it was an F5, was mostly a cone, not necessarily the stovepipe that we see here in this middle right image. So this cone above that gives a much better look at what the tornado looked like when it was at its maximum strength. Right around the middle numbers of the amount of F5s from this outbreak, remember there are 7, we have the first of 2 Tanner, Alabama tornadoes. This tornado started west of Moulton and went to Harvest, Alabama, Moulton being in Alabama as well. Again, this was the first of 2 tornadoes to strike Tanner, Alabama in just half an hour. This tornado achieved a very impressive track of 84 kilometers. Along its way, it would injure 267 and kill 28. This tornado would rapidly intensify both in strength and in width right before it hit Mount Moriah. I apologize if I am pronouncing that wrong, Mount Moriah. A witness reported that the largest recognizable objects from a destroyed home were just bed springs. That is how thorough the damage was. This tornado had a brief stint as a waterspout as it crossed the Tennessee River. As it finished crossing the Tennessee River and went to the other side, this tornado would scour and then plaster this now lifted soil up onto trees and also onto the sidings of homes. As you can guess, this being an F5, many homes and many trees in Tanner were completely swept away. This tornado would abruptly dissipate after it had hit the town of Harvest. The southwest of Tanner, Alabama to southeast of Manchester, Tennessee F5 was originally disputed in rating and is still by some meteorologists today. Personally, since there wasn't a good effort to distinguish the damage between these two tornadoes, I personally do not agree with the F5 rating, but it is officially an F5, so I will go with it. Unlike in the case with 2013 El Reno, when we had Doppler indicated wind speeds of 296, I'm going to go with this tornado being an F5. This tornado would have an even more impressive path length than the previous at 134.1 kilometers. Very, very long. This tornado would injure 190 and kill 16. This tornado would near parallel the first Tanner's path, surprisingly. Obviously, this one having a longer path, though, as well. There's also, whether it be from more destruction from this tornado or whether it be debris kicked up from this tornado, there is notably some very extensive windrowing. Most of the casualties from this tornado, meaning deaths and injuries, would occur in and around the Tanner community as people were trying to help with damage recovery. There would actually not be any same states F5s until 1990 in Kansas. Our last tornado here, the north of Vernon to Bisham, Alabama F5, was a fast-moving, nighttime, violent tornado. The only thing that could have possibly made this thing worse would be if it was rain-wrapped. This tornado coursed a very impressive 128 kilometers. Not the longest path, as the second Tanner achieved 134, and that path's not even the longest. It was actually an F4 that achieved, I think, was 212. But that aside, the Gwen F5 would injure 272 people and kill 28. A mobile home plant, which is the damage photo seen here at the upper right, was completely demolished beyond repair. Many brick structures were also just simply brushed away. They were no more. This tornado would even manage to dislodge or move some foundation slabs. We're not talking major dislodgement or a foundation slab being completely wiped away. We're just simply talking about them just being moved a fair bit. Foundation slabs are meant not to move. This is something that, in my opinion, not even an EF4 does. I believe that only EF5s can do this, on top of pavement scouring as well. This tornado is in contention for being possibly the strongest of the Outbreak, along with Brandenburg and Xenia. As this tornado was in William B. Bankhead National Forest, this F5 was up to a mile wide. As you can tell very clearly where this tornado went through. Again, that was our last tornadoes. Now we have our significance and just a little bit of trivia. When you average, or when you total all of the F5s and EF5s that have ever happened, which come out to like 0.1% on both the Fujita scale and the enhanced Fujita scale, and then average them out since 1950 to now, you get an average of just around one F5 or EF5 a year. The 74 Super would produce 7 in under a day. If that does not show just how ripe the conditions were, then I do not know what does, other than the other 141 tornadoes. 23 of those were F4s, by the way, as well. That satellite photo from earlier from the Gwen F5 was taken actually in October. That shows just how visible, specifically in the forest, that tornado's path actually was. This outbreak actually led to Dr. Ted Fujita discovering the idea of microbursts and downbursts, as well as realizing after a 10-month investigation that 3/4 of all of the tornadoes produced by this outbreak were from families, meaning just one cell, like I described with Martinsburg, with the Martinsburg F5, ran into conditions conducive for a tornado, dropped a tornado lifts, the cell weakens or whatever, causing the tornado to lift. The cell then recycles, forms a new mesocyclone, drops another tornado, rinse and repeat until the tornado is out of favorable conditions. Or it just simply fizzles out, runs out of energy. The fact that well over 100 of the tornadoes were produced by just like probably around 24 supercells is very impressive. And this is also the first time that cyclic supercells were truly established to really even be a thing in the first place. And with that, our Super Outbreak edition comes to an end. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video.